da, 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 da. Right, where's the music? I need to make a introduction to this episode. This episode was originally recorded with Owen Cottom, my good friend. Can you believe it? Back in January. It was originally recorded as the first episode in a series on mental health. But if you've listened to the recent episode with Ed Moss, it's episode number 87, you'll know I had a little bit of trouble nailing Ed down to finish the series. So, whilst originally this was supposed to be the first episode in the series on mental health, it is in fact the final episode in the current series on mental health, and it's due to the monster returning. And that reference will become clear later on in the podcast. The monster rearing its head has delayed the release of this episode somewhat, but it is ready to go out now, and there is some amazing stuff in here. So, listen up. Shumai guys, welcome back to the Life to the Full podcast, the podcast that helps you make the most of your time here on Earth. My name's Dav Morse, I'm your host, and today I am very excited. I'm very excited to have a good friend of mine, Owen Cottom, on the episode. We are kicking off a series on mental health where I get to interview some people to find out a little bit more about them, about their experiences with mental health, and how we can support each other. What's really come through to me over this series is how important it is to have relationships, people that we can rely on, even in our times of difficulty. This is a wide-ranging conversation that I have with Owen. We discuss all sorts of issues about mental health, how it can affect everyone, even if you've got pretty good mental health. We talk about anxiety and catastrophizing, and we talk about what it means to be a good leader and how leaders can lead out of their pain, and everything that we struggle with, everything that we go through can be used for good, and it can be viewed as a struggle that will help other people if we frame it in the right way. I do hope you enjoy this episode with Owen Cottom. Here we go. Welcome, Owen Cottom, to the Life to the Full podcast. This is not your first podcast interview, I understand.
No, I have frequented other podcasts, but it is my first appearance on Life to the Full, and it is a privilege to be here.
Owen Cottom, I know you as the pastor of my church, good friend. We have known each other for 10 years?
I'm afraid it goes 12, further back than that, Dav.
13,
I think it's probably
years.
Closer to that. I wasn't married at the time when we first met, and Charlotte, my wife, and I have now been married for 13 or 14
what?
years.
No.
So I'm afraid it ages us, Dav, but
Wow.
It's been longer than you think.
That has been longer than I think.
Time flies when you're having fun.
I think we'd only just met you, and you invited us to your wedding.
That's right.
And we were like, oh, unexpected. And then, the foresight that you had, thought these guys are going to be with us for a while. So, yeah, we're going back a long way now.
It's quite a pressurised thing, wedding invites, because you are trying to gather up everyone that you've known so far in your life. But as you say, you're also looking forward who are going to be part of our journey ahead. So,
yes, that would have been the smart thing to do. We did not do that well. And I think a lot of the people at our wedding don't really see much anymore. So there we go. Very, very wise. You can hear, listeners, the wisdom of this man. Foresight, looking into the future, planning for the future. I love it. Tell us a little bit about your life, your history, how you grew up, what has brought you to where you are today as pastor of Grace Church Cardiff.
So I grew up in Abergavenny, which is a town on the borders of Wales, a beautiful little town surrounded by hills on the edge of the Brecon Beacons and Brycheiniog. Happy childhood, and was brought up in a home where faith was a part of my everyday life, and I guess that became my own at some point in my early teenage years, to the extent that by the time I reached the age of leaving home, I knew that something I wanted to give my life to was helping other people to discover the friendship with God that I had discovered through the Christian faith. Did a gap year in a church in Oxford as part of exploring that kind of life vocation, and then came to Cardiff University, where I met my now wife. We got married shortly after university, worked for a church in the north of the city for some years where we knew you guys.
Yeah.
And then we started a church in the south of Cardiff back in 2017, 2018. And that's been what our lives have looked like since, investing in that community of faith that we started down there and seeking to share the good news that we have found.
So this journey of faith that you've been on, I'm guessing that is something that continues to motivate you in your current work. And yeah, tell us a little bit about what you do day to day. My father was a pastor. The joke was at the time, the guy only works one day a week. Do you still get that joke?
Yeah, not so much actually, but it's a nice one to for people to have in the back pocket, and for me to have when meeting people for the first time. If you say I only work Sundays and see if people can guess what you do, then that's quite an easy way in probably. It's a varied role being the pastor of a church, but I think the core motivation is driven by, for me, it's driven by this theme of friendship with God. The Christian faith claims to invite and offer to us a way of being connected in living relationship with our Maker, and a way of having our lives reordered, I guess, by knowing Him, knowing the way that life is meant to work. And so, whatever my day-to-day entails, whether it be meeting people or preparing teachings,
coming on podcasts,
planning some initiatives, certainly praying is obviously a big part of what I try to give my life's rhythm to, but certainly incorporate into my work as well. So whatever different activities are entailed, and it is quite a varied existence being a pastor, I think the underlying motivation is to see people discover and grow in their friendship with God. Spiritual formation is a word that a phrase that I quite like to describe what it means to be a pastor, that we're helping people be formed spiritually, which then goes on and has a knock-on effects on other parts of their lives. Absolutely. To live life to the full.
Absolutely, yeah. One of the questions I like to ask guests is, what are your superpowers? So, there we go. What are your superpowers, Owen Cottom?
Well, if I were to have superpowers, because, I feel a little bit uncomfortable calling myself a superpowered person, but I think, have you ever done Strength Finder, Dav? Have you ever come across that kind of, it's not a personality profiling, it's like a talent profiling tool?
I think you might have mentioned it. I think you might have...
I might have done it with you once, actually, in little team in
ago,
church. Yeah. So there's this thing called Strength Finder. It draws out people's strengths. The two that I come up as having superpowers in, I guess, would be strengths that they call connectedness and intellection. Now, the second one doesn't mean that I'm intelligent necessarily. It means that I live my life in my mind, I guess, and we're going to come on to some of this.
Yeah.
But I'm quite good at thinking deeply about things, and I'm quite good at making connections. I've got a good memory, and so that's helpful when it comes to the scriptures in my day-to-day role as a pastor. It's also helpful when it comes to people, remembering names and faces, and building bridges and making connections between things, and how is this thing related to that thing, and what might this person need in this situation. That ability to think deeply and make connections is something that I'm probably better than the average person at. I'm also quite disciplined, so that helps life in general. So there would be a few of my kind of supercharged personality traits, I guess: connectedness, intellection, memory, discipline.
Excellent. That leads us on to why I've asked you to come on the podcast. I, as you know, run a podcast where we look at financial health, physical health, mental health, relational health, and spiritual health. And I'll probably get you back on at some point to talk about spiritual health. But we're kind of focusing on mental health at the moment. The reason that I want to ask people on for this particular series is because I feel like I am not an expert at mental health at all. I want to find out more about different people's journeys, different people's expressions of good mental health and the struggles that they've had. And I know that you have had some struggles, which we're going to hopefully delve into. So what are some of the mental health insights that you've had from your role as a pastor? You've likely worked with a lot of different people from all walks of life, those who are mentally very tough and very strong and very healthy, and then some people who are struggling with their mental health. So what kind of insights can you share with me, share with anybody who's listening, and what have you found out?
I think one of the things that comes to mind immediately is just that because as human beings we all have minds, and thinking is a big part of our day-to-day existence. It strikes me that this idea of being mentally healthy, it does really touch on all of us. Of course, there are people with profound difficulties in the realm of their thinking. And of course, very helpfully in recent years, there have been clinical and medical interventions that have been utilized to both recognize and to help people with some of those more profound and acute struggles that people have with mental health. But I think one of my reflections is that as human beings, having a well-ordered mind and a mind that is able to take reality as it is something that we all are on a journey of discovery with. So even someone who may not struggle with, say, depression or anxiety or others of the terms that we would use to describe a certain kind of mental health struggle, even someone who doesn't struggle with those things may be thinking about themselves too much or may not be thinking about others, or may not be embracing reality as it truly is. And so that's one of my kind of opening insights, is that we're all on a journey to grow in having a well-ordered mind. I think another thing that I've learned, particularly through my role, is how lonely it can be for those who do have particular and acute struggles. I think with other illnesses, for example, physical manifestations mean it's much more easy to identify, it's much harder to hide, and there's probably a degree of sharing, vulnerability, solidarity that comes through that. I think one of the things with people who struggle with mental health is it can be a profoundly lonely place because it's unseen, and people through coping mechanisms and other things can hide those things. And so the power of having a community of people to share some of those struggles, certainly we've seen firsthand in church how powerful and transformative that can be for people. So those would be a couple of things that come to mind.
It seems like over the past few years, 4, 5, 6 years, people are, in general, maybe it's the corners of the internet that I hang out, in general, trying to get more of an open conversation about that. Is it something that you've kind of observed, seen, and found to be helpful?
Absolutely. I think people being more willing to talk about what's going on the inside of their heads has definitely once again, in the context of faith, which I guess is the context that I'm speaking from, I really believe that the God who made us is interested in the whole of us, our whole person, and in some ways bringing each part of us into his light. Our heart's desires and our wills, or our bodies and what we do with our lives, but our minds as well. I really think there's healing to be found in bringing things into the light. And so I've seen a surge of people's willingness to talk about these things, and not feeling a shame attached to vulnerability in the same way as maybe previous generations have known, which once again, in the context of trusting relationship, can be incredibly powerful, and can have a healing effect in itself on someone's mental health struggles.
I chat with my wife about all these kind of mental health things, and we are coming from quite different places, and I'm always kind of wondering, what are there any downsides of that? Can you see any kind of issues that it brings up?
I could see that an awareness of it could verge into an over-awareness of it, in that we could become consumed by what's going on in our minds. And I speak out of personal experience as someone who's very introspective by nature. Actually, sometimes I do just need to get out and live and get myself out of my head. And I think there is, that in itself is something that we can apply to one's mental health, is the usefulness of getting out of your head. Jesus, for example, when approaching the subject of anxiety, said to his disciples, "Look at the birds of the air, look at the flowers of the field." Now, not only was he trying to give an example to them of things that didn't need to worry, they could just be what they were, but I think he was also saying to anxiety-prone human beings, there's a power in stepping into the natural world and getting out of your head to diffuse and deflate some of the worries that you might feel. So I can see how an overemphasis of it can send us maybe into mental hamster wheels that we can't get out of. And there's a kind of a thing about resiliency. I think that maybe previous generations have had. You think of the war generations, for example. They may not have had the luxury to spend lots of time to consider their mental health. And we know actually that obviously some of the traumas that people live through does have then a generational impact for the negatively. But equally, I think there was probably a resiliency to some of that generation that we look back on and think, yes, because they weren't maybe so introspectively considering these things, they were able to face some of the cruel and harsh realities of life in a way that we might want to put a shell over ourselves in this generation, perhaps. Yeah,
I think about my granddad, and he was, he's exactly that opposite end of the spectrum in terms of he was resilient, never made a fuss, just kept going, and was able to withstand some, pretty tough times. Stuff from his childhood that would break many people these days, but then he wasn't able to really open up and share, and there was so many kind of hidden family secrets that just kind of came out later on, which interesting observation.
There's a guy called Ronald Rolheiser who has written on some of these themes and talks about any, and I'm misquoting him here, I'm paraphrasing, but any stress that's placed on us that we don't transform, we retransmit. I think another thing that I've learned, particularly through my role, is how lonely it can be for those who do have particular and acute struggles from those things. And I think that's probably an example, generationally, maybe there's a lot of retransmission of some of the trauma that they did go through, that people have gone through.
How is your mental health today? And how has it changed? What are the kind of struggles that you've had over the years?
So I'd say today, how is my mental health today? Well, it's a bright and sunny day in Cardiff, so it's
always
day.
sunny in Cardiff. If anybody's listening from Germany or America, it's always sunny in Cardiff.
Yeah, absolutely. Although the happiest parts of the world are often the ones that get the least sunshine, aren't they? Scandinavia, you know, that's a whole podcast series in itself.
Absolutely, dive into that.
Go and do some touring of Norway and Denmark and places to learn their secrets. So I would say my mental health's in a stable, steady place. I've often used this picture to describe my mental landscape. I don't know if this would be helpful for people or whether it's just part of my overthinking of things and my living in a world of pictures in my imagination. I've often described my mental health as like a boat sat on a Scottish loch, a nice lake. Think about a nice calm Scottish loch with a boat just gently, you know, that you've got little kind of waves that batter the boat, and maybe the wind picks up at different times, and the stresses and strains of life kind of bring a bit of a buffeting to the boat. But on the whole, through the years, I've had quite consistent kind of steady mental health. But the reason why I specify a Scottish loch is because what I've discovered at certain episodes over my life, my adult life, is that there is a monster that lurks beneath the surface. And there's been a one episode in recent memory in particular, which I guess we may get into in a moment, where that monster has gone from sleeping peacefully and not disturbing that little boat on that lake to rearing its head and causing a bit of mental chaos. So that's the best, I think, in pictures. That's the best way I've got of describing what my mental landscape looks like. And maybe some people can resonate that there are times when the wind picks up, and certainly, you know, in my work and just family life and those kinds of things, I can point to situations in the last month, 6 months, year, where it's felt like, oh, I've got to row a bit harder here to keep steady. But on the whole, it's been a steady few years. I guess you might want to get into the monster.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about this monster that has been, that when it reared its head, what did the monster rearing its head look like?
So I'll connect this back to my superpowers as a way to describe this story. I said my superpowers are related to making connections in my mind, thinking deeply about things, memory, all of those kind of themes. And I think those things serve me very well in lots of ways in my life. And I do think that it's a way in which I kind of express my faith, my friendship with God, through pondering and enjoying the truths that I know about Him. But they do have a shadow side, those things.
Everything's got a shadow side.
Everything's got a shadow. Every superpower comes with its own potential darkness.
Absolutely.
Iron Man in, what is it, that Captain America versus Iron Man film where he goes a bit AWOL. That's a reference that Dav isn't
I have no idea.
Isn't resonating with whatsoever. And some of the listeners might not be. So to take you back then to where the monster really reared its head in recent memory, my wife Charlotte and I, 2015, we were hoping to start a family, and Charlotte got pregnant, and that first pregnancy sadly ended in a miscarriage. Later that year, pregnant again, second pregnancy ended in a miscarriage. Later that year, third pregnancy ended in a miscarriage. Now, through 2015, that year when we were walking through this sadness, this longing and hoping, but this loss at the same time, 3 times loss. Once again, I'd say my boat felt quite steady. My faith held secure. I was trying to be positive, and there was, I think, just a reactive kind of, right, keep on hoping, keep on hoping, keep on hoping. When the monster actually reared its head for us, for me personally, was then when Charlotte got pregnant again in 2016. And this time, it was a healthy pregnancy. And we've got our firstborn little boy from that healthy pregnancy. But there seemed to be almost a traumatic response from that season in 2015 of those 3 miscarriages, that my mind then went into overdrive in thinking through all that could go wrong with this pregnancy. I'd seen 3 times, this is not a guaranteed thing, there's not a certainty here. And because of my ability to think deeply, to make connections, that, like I said, serves me very well when I'm casting a vision for church life or something, or when I'm trying to help someone in a situation where I can bring in a connection from scripture or whatever it might be. But in this instance, it served me very poorly, because I was just able to see danger on every side. And I wonder if this is going to harm Charlotte in the pregnancy. I wonder if that's going to harm the baby. I wonder if this is going to go wrong. I started, as the word that was given to me by a counsellor I saw in that season, catastrophizing, just assuming the worst, and almost going from a surface level anxiety to doom in a matter of seconds, where most people would work along a kind of anxiety trail a little bit more in a little bit slower of a way, and then reason may come and kind of pull them back into calm, steady existence. I was going from 0 to 60, from a thought of harm to assuming the worst incredibly quickly. And it through that time, I was trying desperately to row that boat on that lake as the waves were just kind of lashing me, and, you know, coming into the boat, and the monster had reared its ugly head. I was trying to keep in control, and I think that was one of the key themes for me, was my desire to control outcomes. But the reality was, for a good 4 or 5 months, I was, under the surface, I was an anxious wreck, just assuming the worst. And it began even to then impinge on assumptions about my own health. You know, all of a sudden I began making connections. I wonder if this is unhealthy for me, not just for the baby. And it kind of snowballed for a little while, to the point that I was mentally in a bad way.
So those first 3 miscarriages, that obviously within 1 year, that's like an incredible amount of hurt and heartbreak. You said you were kind of able to hold on to the hope of this, you know, potential hopeful next pregnancy. Who did you share with? Who did you kind of go to with these difficulties, or was it something you just kept in? And how do you think that kind of affected what came next?
Absolutely. It was so important for me to share with some trusted friends, individuals. I think even in my role as a pastor, a kind of spiritual leader, you want to be strong for others, and you want to be a source of spiritual help for people. And I think that can bring with it a temptation, whilst you're seeking to create an environment where others are being vulnerable and can share their concerns. The temptation that can create for the leader in that instance is that you've got to put on a brave face. And I think I was drawn into humility fairly quickly with the extent of how anxious I felt, to recognize I need to share and offload this. Thankfully, some of our closest friends, who you know, Dav, had been through their own journey with mental health, and the guy, a good friend of mine, had been suffering from quite profound OCD. So knowing and having journeyed with him through some of his battle with that, I knew here were people who, although it was different kind of mental health crisis, difficulty, here were people who understand. And so they were some of the people we really drew into the journey. I mentioned that I chatted to a counsellor on a couple of occasions, and that was very helpful. I think taking it out of our marriage was very important, because obviously Charlotte was living this with me day in, day out. And in some ways, because her body was carrying the baby of whom I was becoming greatly concerned about the health and well-being. It was very hard for Charlotte to kind of live through that time whilst Owen was so anxious. So it was very important to speak to others. And yeah, over time, that power of offloading and being listened to made a difference, certainly. And as I said earlier, taking yourself out of your head is so important. I think maybe particularly with anxiety, because anxiety is a conversation that goes on in your head. And like I use the illustration of a hamster wheel. You go round and round and round, you ruminate on this thing. And I do think that speaking that anxiety out releases the hamster from the cage. And even if it returns, there is a kind of a mental release of pressure that comes as you speak to people about these things.
I was going to ask what kind of then brought you out of the state that you were in, struggling, because obviously now you've described yourself back at the calm lock level again. So was it just talking to people? Was it just vocalizing things, expressing things out loud? I've got not a lot of experience with this kind of thing, and I noticed you didn't come to me for sympathy and help. Wisely so.
Oh no, Dav, I could have, absolutely. You would have given me.
I'd go, I'll be fine. You'll be all right.
You would have given me a couple of podcast episodes to listen to, and I would have been on my way.
Yeah. So was it just that, or was there more to it, or what kind of brought you through to the other side, so to speak?
Yeah, I think it was the power of listening, speaking and listening, offloading. I think I'd be lying if I didn't say my faith was an anchor in that time, and I can look back now and see very profound ways that I feel like God spoke to us through the Bible and reassured me, and that was a great help. I think it got to the stage, and this is the nature of catastrophization, where some of the fears were so outlandishly wild and so disconnected from reality and so illogical that when the baby was born and of course, you know, there's the wonder of new life is the fragility of it as part of it. And so people go through profound suffering and difficulty when it comes to that stage of life. But the fact that we had a healthy baby, and that then I was able to see my darkest, strangest fears were just not anywhere close to being met in reality. I think that was a really helpful kind of rebuke to my wandering, connected mind. And through the process, I think being listened to by Charlotte and by others who were all very gracious was very helpful, but there was something as well of seeing the way that my fears didn't shake them, if that makes sense. That they could see that this monster, if you like, was literally a monster of the mind and not a monster in reality. So that was an important part of the process, I think. Yeah.
This idea of getting out of your head is something I can get behind, I can appreciate, and I can think, yeah, that's great advice. How do you do that when, you know, it's all just going round and round and round, but maybe it is vocalizing it and chatting it through with people.
Yeah. Prayer is that as well. And you read the book of Psalms in the Bible, and I think we would now say of David and others who wrote those Psalms, many of them were walking through mental health crises. Yeah. And they were using the gift of poetry and language to express to God their deepest fears, their catastrophizing, their concerns, their difficulties. And so that, once again, was lifeline to me. I prayer journal, so I write down my prayers, not all my prayers obviously, but I spend some time every week set aside for that kind of activity. And I think, once you take it out of your mind where it is just this running commentary and it's quite vague and abstract, and once you put it into language, there's almost, and I'm speaking maybe a bit too metaphorically here, but there's almost like it encloses it. It kind of it packages it up in a way that it's not quite so. It almost binds it, if I could put it like that. Like it reduces some of its all-encompassing power, which certainly with anxiety, once again, it can take over your mind. You're thinking about nothing else. And I think whether it be in conversation or whether it be in prayer or written down, there's something very powerful about binding and encasing it into words that release it from your mind, and that sometimes place it in the cold light of day, and you can see, sometimes even as the word leaves your mouth, you think, how stupid am I for worrying about that? And I'm not diminishing people's concerns and anxieties, but there's been many times where I was like, now that I've said that out loud, I realise that this isn't something to be concerned about. It doesn't necessarily overnight change that I stop worrying about it, but it breathes a different air into your suffocated mind, definitely.
Excellent. Just before we move off this topic, if there's somebody listening at home who has a friend or a spouse or a colleague or someone working through some of these mental health issues and they are aware of them, what are some of the worst things you can do as a friend in these situations?
I really struggle in many ways with this question, simply because I think those who are around me genuinely were so sensitive and mindful of the way to handle a case like me, which I'm amazed by in many ways, because none of them were necessarily professionally trained except for this counsellor. I think, though, if there was one kind of thematic no-go, it's just everything along the fixing line of things.
That's my natural instinct.
It's where most of us kind of live our lives, is in the problem-solving realm. And there's much in the world which it can work on mathematical equations of, this is wrong, apply this fix to it, and this will be right. And once again, I want to emphasize there are certain helpful principles that can help regardless of what you're facing mental health wise, but the impulse to try and fix someone's broken mental state, I think, can put a pressure on that person that doesn't help them, and often it does overlook the complexity of the mental pathways that knotted in someone's mind that need to be dealt with. Once again, I can't help going here. I'm a pastor. There's a book in the Bible called Job. Job is a man who faces profound suffering, loses almost everything overnight, and he's surrounded by these so-called friends of his, who many of whom are just trying to make this a black and white equation of like, Job, you must have done something wrong to be inheriting this, in the moral maths of the universe. There must be a simple fix. And by the end of the book of Job, God confronts Job and his friends and basically says to them, I'm much bigger than you think. My purposes and plans are way beyond what you can understand. And trying to reduce things to a simple fix is not always the best way of approaching life's messy, disordered reality. And we just need our eyes lifted to a bigger picture of God and life and the universe and whatever else. So I would say that fixing impulse is the one that I would counsel people away from, which is obviously massively counterintuitive, because when we see someone that we love going through a struggle like this, of course the right thing to do is want to help them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I, as you said, Dav, I have to admit, as someone on the other side of this mental health struggle, I still find that impulse very very real within me when I'm faced with it in someone else. I want to fix the situation.
Yeah, it's easy to do the opposite of what you know you should do when you're in somebody else's shoes.
Absolutely.
And this idea of looking for a bigger picture, higher purpose, easier done when you look back, I guess.
Yeah, definitely, because when the monster erupts out of the waters, it's all that you can see. The landscape, the hills over there, the sky above there.
It's hard to rationalize in the moment. Maybe this will be good for me in the long run. Maybe I can help somebody else going through the same thing at some point in the future, because all you can think of is just getting the boats to safety or whatever it is.
And if I could use an illustration of that, I think when we started the church shortly after this period, we had a weekend away where there was a dozen or so of us gathered there who were part of the kind of forming of this church community. And I don't know if you remember this, but on the Sunday morning of this weekend away, I was, as the kind of leader of this new venture of starting this church, I was due to give a talk, a teaching that was basically designed in my mind to kind of G the troops up, you know, let's go, let's help change people's lives with the message of Jesus. Let's start a community of faith that makes a positive impact on people's lives for him. And midnight, the night before I got up to give that talk, I had this profound sense. I would describe it as, I think God was speaking to me, but it was just an overwhelming sense. Owen, you need to get up and share your story of how you struggled in 2016 with your mental health. And I thought, what? That's the last thing people need to hear at the beginning of this pioneering venture. The last thing they need to hear is that their leader is weak and has these propensities and has this kind of story of this real struggle. But as I got up and shared that morning, the impact it had on other people in that little fledgling church community of recognizing this is a place where we can be vulnerable, and this is a place where our weakness is not something to be ashamed of, but actually something that God redeems, and that new purpose, higher calling, all of that stuff can come out of, it was more powerful than any motivational talk that I could have given as I look back on it. And certainly in the when you're in the thick of it, you can't see that it's providing you with opportunities to help other people in that way. But in hindsight, you can see that. And I think that's once again where the ability to... Often I find with people who struggle with anxiety, that's the shadow of the bright side of the ability to envision a better future. And I think training our minds when anxieties flare up to utilize that other mental function of being able to draw from the future into your present, a more hopeful narrative is a really important thing to learn. And I think in my better moments in the struggle of 2016, I was able to kind of lift my head above the water and think, maybe there will be purpose behind this that I can't see, that I'll be able to help people. I
do remember that, actually. I remember that quite clearly, which is why I've asked you to come on the podcast, because I don't know how many times you shared it.
That was the last time I shared all this story, as far as I am aware. In conversation, it may have come up a couple of times, but yeah.
But that had an effect on me, even as someone who maybe would struggle to understand, because I haven't gone through the same things, and struggle to understand, the difficulties. So thank you for sharing. And I think just getting to that point, shortening that time frame where you can, if something bad happens, if something awful happens, you've got basically two options of how to deal with it. Either you can think, this is, the end, this is awful, my life's, going to be horrendous forever. Or you can say, well, maybe this will have some kind of positive effect in the future. Shortening that time frame, hopefully, to where you can think, yes, I know this is really hard now. This is really difficult, but it will bring me, purpose and joy in the future is something we can possibly aim for.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just to finish off then, a couple of random questions. What is something that you used to believe and you've changed your mind on?
It's probably a repeat of my last answer in some ways, which I think I probably thought that being a leader meant putting your best forward. Yeah. And now I'm much more inclined to believe that the best leaders lead out of their scars and they lead out of their weaknesses. And of course, they incorporate and integrate their superpowers into their leadership for the good of others. But I think through that journey that I've described, that's probably a belief that internally has shifted.
You've got an ability to put succinctly quite profound things. So the leaders lead out of their scars. I like that. That might be the title of the episode.
Yeah.
And then finally, last question, I ask all my guests on the Life to the Full podcast, what does living life to the full mean to you?
I'll come back to how I started the conversation, which is friendship with God. I think finding in all of life's ups and downs, all of our enjoyments and all of our sufferings, I think finding our way towards walking closely in friendship with our Maker, that to me is what life to the full is, which is very liberating because it means there are some things that I would put like as the next layer down of life to the full, like have a sabbatical in Iceland every year for 2 months. That may or may not materialise.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds pretty good to me.
That probably won't materialise in the shape of life that I've been given. I think the idea of friendship with God and our souls being alive in knowing Him infuses whatever else that is put on our plate in life. Kids, job, money, no money, holidays. It infuses it, with purpose, like you said, but also it infuses it with an ability to enjoy and to see meaning in it all, to find those connections, that connectedness.
Friendship with God.
Friendship with God, and with a 1B as a sabbatical in Iceland.
Sabbatical in Iceland. Yeah, that sounds great to me. Well, thank you, Owen Cottom, for coming on to the Life to the Full podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'll see you on Sunday.
See you on Sunday.
That was an awesome chat with Owen Cottom. I absolutely loved it. Here are some of my key takeaways. Number 1, mental health can affect us all. We all have thinking minds, we all have brains, and we all should be taking care of it, even if we consider ourselves to be in good mental health. We need to do something to keep that.
Because as human beings, we all have minds, and thinking is a big part of our day-to-day existence. It strikes me that this idea of being mentally healthy, it does really touch on all of us.
Number 2, people that struggle with mental health issues are often really lonely, and that in itself causes a lot of difficulty. Talking to someone and having someone go through something with you, listening to you, that's certainly Owen's experience, is so important. Having someone there to share life with is vitally important for good mental health. We also know that having someone to share life with is healthy in all sorts of ways, physical ways as well as relational ways. Thirdly, stress is a massive factor when it comes to mental health. This is a theme that will come up later on in this series, that stress can cause all sorts of difficulty. So, although some stress is a good thing, it makes us perform, a lot of the time we have chronic stress, which is really, really bad for us. We need to transform those stresses lest we transmit them onto others.
But any stress that's placed on us that we don't transform, we retransmit. And so it comes out in some way if we haven't done the work to to deal with it healthily and heal up from those things. And I think that's probably an example, generationally. Maybe there's a lot of retransmission of some of the trauma that they did go through that people have gone through.
Fourthly, don't try and fix people. Don't try and fix their problems, because it doesn't actually help. I know how difficult that is as a tendency for me to hold back from trying to think, right, well, if you think this, then we can do this. If you think this, then we can do this. But often in those times of difficulties, trying to fix the problem isn't the right answer.
If there was one kind of thematic no-go, it's just everything along the fixing line of things.
Don't forget to leave a review or a rating on your app of choice where you listen to this podcast. And if you want to get in touch, send me a message, give me some feedback. I'd love to hear from you. Send me a message at lifetothefullpodcast@gmail.com or lifetothefullpodcast on Instagram and Threads. Hit me up. Till next time, peace out.